Hello everyone, and welcome to the first season of Tomorrow City podcast, the world's biggest platform for cities. It's Areti Markopoulou speaking, and you are listening to the show that brings you ideas today for tomorrow city life. Through global interviews, we bring a diverse set of opinions and debates from the people that are already building the cities of tomorrow, because the challenges for tomorrow should be tackled today. Episode 5. New life for villages and outskirts. Pandemics as a driver of urban exodus. Any major city tries to impress you with a skyline silhouette, the imposing presence of the town hall, or a few more emblematic icons that appear on tourist postcards. That area we call downtown, where some historical or legendary figure, for a more or less justified geostrategic reason, pointed with his finger and began to place one stone on another. That area keeps its magnetism, does it? During the 20th century, stones were placed in any way, anywhere. We have to recognize that rapid urban growth process has been messy most of times. And without a comprehensive plan, social cohesion is abandoned at the motto, every man for himself, generating migratory tensions and related inequalities that may become endemic. That downtown magnetic field is losing power, right? Another vector force, to living in the first or second suburban belt, where access to housing is more affordable, was the only option for many youngers and immigrants looking for opportunities. But, and here it is, it has become more than a trend during these tough months in several countries. The priorities have changed at all, and the dreamed apartment in town has been relegated to the background in favor of areas where social distance allows to live outdoors without fear of contagion, the new epitome of thriving. Consequences: metropolises are losing inhabitants for the first time in centuries. New York's population has declined more than 0.5 percentage point in the last year, which means a fall of more than 100,000 people. Will the cities take the chance to reinvent themselves, or are we facing a magnetic pole reversal? Perhaps this crisis was the boost that the countryside needed to avoid depopulation. If digital transformation reaches all corners, we could move from the smart city concept to the smart region one, and that may be the best breaking news of the pandemic. You may have heard of Exponential View, one of the most influential newsletter and podcast, which explains how society and the political economy are changing under the force of technology. Azeem Azhar is the responsible of it, besides being an entrepreneur, analyst, strategist, or investor, among others. So, hello Azeem, it is a great pleasure to have you with us.
Very nice to be here. Thank you, Areti.
As I was saying, Azeem, the Exponential View has become a benchmark source of insights about technology disruption, and it is as well as the impact that this disruption has on the economy and our society. So I would like to ask you, what led you to launch this project?
Well, launching it was a very personal story. I had been building a startup for the previous 8 years, and that company was acquired. And I found myself in the acquiring business, which is a wonderful company. But once you've been the boss of your own firm, it's a very strange place to be. And when you're a startup entrepreneur, you focus very, very intensely on a single spot on the wall. And doing that for 8 years is quite tiring. And so when I sold the company, I started to look upwards and around and see what was going on. And I noticed that there was a range of things happening in technology that in my 25-year career, I hadn't seen before. The pace of change across not just computing, but across manufacturing, across industry, across energy, across biology, across agriculture, was really quite remarkable. And I started to think about that and write about it in this newsletter.
In fact, the Exponential View explores, you mentioned a lot of different trends. but as well as the preeminent role of cities in an ever-growing urbanized world. And we know that cities' importance in global politics, it of course exceeds by far the 60-40 of percentage population that holds with rural. But do you also consider that this trend will be more pronounced the following years, or rural has a chance to raise a voice?
It's such an interesting question. And, I think if we look at over the last 10 or 15 years, especially in richer countries, not just in Europe, but also in Asia, the rural-urban divide has been a critical political divide. We can look at Japan, we can look at Turkey, we can look at Hungary, of course in France, the UK, United Kingdom, and the United States. I mean, it's become that political divide. But I think we have to remember, of course, that the biggest cities in the world over the next 30 years are not going to be in these countries. They're going to be in other parts of the world, predominantly in Africa and in parts of Asia. And so even if there is a tension against cities in the richer parts of the world, the tens of millions of people moving into big cities in Africa will overwhelm any of those tensions. That said, when we look at what's happening in Western cities, and after COVID, there's a lot has been written about the death of the city, and the fact that theoretically everybody wants to leave San Francisco and everybody wants to leave New York. I think these are very, very short-term fluctuations, because the arguments for being in a city, the power of agglomeration, which is us all coming together and having serendipitous contact with each other, it still exists, and it exists beyond a chat room or a set of Zoom calls. And so I've written about this last year in 2020, saying, don't call time on the mega city. The big city is still going to persist for many of the reasons why big cities persisted in the 20th century, in the 19th century, in the first century. The rationale, in a sense, remains the same.
But although as you say, the death of city has not arrived yet, and I would agree with you, also because it's not easy for everybody to abandon the city. I would like to ask you, how did cities, and if they have emerged basically worse of the pandemic than actually smaller towns? And have the inhabitants of the city been left more economically and socially impoverished than the people who live in smaller population centers? Because that might also be a reason for people to start rethinking of where they live now that we are hyper-connected.
Yeah, I think people will rethink, but we have to be careful about what we read into it. We're very early into the pandemic and its effects. So we are starting to vaccinate people. We may feel that we're over the pandemic in a year, but maybe years before we can measure the effects. And it's very early days. There are clearly, throughout history, the wealthy and the powerful have been able to leave cities during pandemics. They left Venice. Isaac Newton left Cambridge during the pandemic of the 17th century. I don't think it's interesting to understand what the elites do or choose to do or choose not to do. I think what's interesting is what happens to the bulk of people in a society. And I think that when you look at someone like me, and I'm a knowledge worker, I'm in my late 40s, I've established my expertise and my social capital and my reputation and my network, I can travel anywhere with a laptop and I can run my business. That's not true for the bulk of people who are going through the start of their career or through their education, where they need to establish their social capital and their professional capacities. So I think that we need to understand that the choice to leave a city is often one that's related to power and position. But of course, the other thing we know is that technologies do reshape our understanding of what a city is. And when in the turn of the 20th century, we started to see cars and railway systems and mass transit emerge in cities like New York, what happened was that the city got bigger, its geographical area spread, because you could be part of the New York economy and not have to be within the small area of what is now Brooklyn and Manhattan. You could be further afield because the technology of transport allowed you to do that. And then we started to create, particularly in the United States, these ideas of suburbs and exurbs, which were only really accessible because you had highways and big cars. So I do also recognize that how we choose to build infrastructure may change the configuration of how we think about what a city is. And what will the megalopolises that are being built in China, for example, the Greater Bay Area, look like? Will they at all resemble a European city like a Barcelona or a Paris or a Bologna? No, I don't think they will at all. But will they be cities? Yes, I'm sure they will be.
On the other hand, there is no doubt that society changes are closely related to any technological advancement. Same goes to economy as well. So I would also like to ask you, because your work is very much focused on the disruption that technology can bring, how do you see the role of technology in the future of our economy and in the future of our society?
Well, that's a really important question. I mean, our economies are often based or transformed by technologies that we call general purpose technologies. They're technologies that can do many, many different things. And a great example is electricity or the internal combustion engine that we put in cars and aircraft and so on. And when we see general purpose technologies emerge, they tend to go through a phase where it takes a while for us to have enough of them installed for entrepreneurs to build new products using them. And where we are today in the digital revolution, entering what I call the exponential age, is that we have new general purpose technologies. And the one we can talk about or think about is computing and artificial intelligence that will transform the nature of the economic production processes. And I'll just give you one sort of simple example that I think is really relevant for cities. So today, if you're in a city and you are looking for fresh vegetables, those vegetables need to be grown. And then normally, if you live in the UK, my tomatoes are grown in Spain. And I order my tomatoes on a Thursday for delivery on Friday. On Tuesday, the tomatoes were in the ground somewhere in Spain, and they get picked, packed, shipped across the channel, and they arrive with me. And it's taken 4 or 5 days, and they ripen on that journey, and they're grown for the length and complexity of that supply chain. In a modern city, what we might start to see are these high intensity urban farms, vertical farms, which are robotically controlled, which use artificial intelligence to maintain the environmental conditions, the water, the stress, the strain, the feedstock, the carbon dioxide, the lighting for the plants. And they can be grown highly, highly locally, often next to the shop that's going to sell them. They will be powered by renewable solar or wind power. So you're not shipping oil from or gas somewhere into a power station. And you're going to have very much faster crop cycles. So you can optimize for the specific expression of the particular products you're growing. And so that really changes the nature of the relationship with the economic value chain. It changes also the product itself, because now you can grow your fruit and your vegetables not for a 1-week supply chain journey from across Europe, but actually for a 1-hour journey from being picked to being in my tummy, my stomach. And I think that that's one example of how these technologies change the economics of something, and then how that changing economics changes our relationship with that product.
I think your example has been great of defining a very close future in both economy and society. You know, you are almost speaking about distributed, hyper-connected models of urbanity, that they are based on local resources. Mm-hmm. And you've named this momentum of new purpose technology as an exponential age. And I wanted to ask you, how do you foresee the accessibility to these technologies? I mean, do you feel that we are able to democratize these technologies to everybody, or this knowledge to everybody?
See, this is why you're the professor, because that's a really hard question, and it's not easy to answer. So let me take a shot at it. So, the technologies are going to get much cheaper, and that means they will be much more affordable. We all carry a smartphone now, and a smartphone is a supercomputer. Nobody anywhere in the world had a computer as powerful as this 20 years ago. But that doesn't mean that the power goes with the ownership. And so we can democratize the availability and the ubiquity of these technologies, but where will the power actually lie? And in the example of the urban vertical farm, the thing I think that we have to think about is that the profit, the control, may not reside with the local community, because the profit may be tied to the intellectual property, the software in the machine learning system, the knowledge of the combinations of food and water and lighting that a particular plant needs could all be proprietary and held by whichever company operates that. Now, in most countries, only one of two companies operate the operating system of the phone. Right? If you're in Barcelona, or you're in Athens, or you're in Paris, you're in London, it's either Google or it's Apple. And the question is, why during the exponential age wouldn't that be exactly the same for local 3D printing, for local vertical farms, that they are controlled by a single monolithic company? And so I think one of the biggest risks and the hardest thing to answer in your question is, will we be able to distribute the power, the political control of these resources that will live in a decentralized, localized way in our cities? Will we be able to distribute that power to the communities in which these resources are being produced and consumed? And I think that's a really interesting question that that we're going to keep asking for years to come.
I think this is rather the best way to close this conversation, highlighting the fact that power does not go together with authorship, as you say, Azeem, and try to work on bottom-up strategies, of course, combined with top-down ones, that they would allow us to create a more accessible future to these technologies, whereas we live in cities or whereas we live in rural. Thank you very much, Azeem, for your contribution, and I wish you a very good day.
Thank you so much, Arati.
You can follow up Tomorrow City on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Listen to our show in your favorite podcast platform and discover much more content about cities and urban innovation at the webpage tomorrow.city. Your voice matters. And here comes this episode's question. Have you considered moving from the city to an urbanization or the countryside during this pandemic year?
Yes, I have thought about moving to the countryside. After months of confinement, I have experienced the need to spend more quality time away from the pavement and large buildings, to connect more with nature and open spaces where I can enjoy new experiences.
Yeah, I think that I feel quite lucky because I live in a city but near the countryside at the same time. But there was lots of moments that stuck in the flat, I thought how lovely it would be to be in a nice big garden, to have a place that I can grow my own food, to not be as dependent as I am of what a city provides me. So yeah, definitely I think that after this lockdown, lots of people like me will look for a flat or a house in the countryside in a near future.
Hi, this is Anshul, and I want to share my views about why I do not want to shift any countryside location in this pandemic situations, because there could be very few job opportunities, very limited access to healthcare, and very few education opportunities for children, fewer entertainment options, and limited conveniences like could be no swimming pool or maybe a good hotel or any entertainment. Maybe public transport be very limited over there. Rural areas, you never know how roads are maintained or not.
Yes, I've considered it, and in fact, it's a reality. I've decided to move from the city to a town next to Barcelona, and I did it basically for two reasons. The main reason is because right now I have the possibility to work from home, so I don't need to take the public transport, and then I can save a bit of time. And the other one is because I wanted to get away a bit from the pollution and the noise and have a more relaxed life.
COVID-19 may have helped redefine and revitalize the urban periphery, but the integration between the center and the suburbs remains still a big challenge. Not to our next guest, though. Diego Fernandez is the Secretary of Social and Urban Integration in the government of the city of Buenos Aires. And since 2015, he manages a very ambitious project, integrating the Barrio 31, one of the oldest informal settlements, as just another neighborhood within the city. Hello, Diego, and welcome to the Tomorrow City podcast.
Hello, Areti, and thank you so much for inviting us.
Diego, how do you address the efforts to connect and integrate disadvantaged periphery like Barrio 31 to the urban core? And what issues, if I may ask, are essential to successfully integrate any periphery area to the city?
Well, I would say that the first thing that you need to have in mind is that when you're talking about urban integration, in reality, urban integration is just a consequence. What you need to tackle is human integration. Human integration is the job that needs to be done. And I think that the great menace that we face as leaders and as a project is to having the wrong focus. If you focus yourself on buildings, on infrastructure, and on hard things, you are missing the picture. And what you need to put your target on is human integration.
Diego, you are somehow mentioning that the biggest challenge within this project was to integrate people. And in Barrio 31, they live around 40,000 people. So I would like to ask you, how do you stimulate the participation of residents in this process of transformation?
Well, participation is something that no matter how strong you do it, no matter how many participations, meetings you set up, is always never enough. It's always never enough. And we did it as fast and as big as we were able of doing it. To be honest, you always have there sort of a challenge. If you participate very, very much, things go slowly. And if you go so very, very fast, you're not able to participate in the way the project demands. So we tried to find a sort of an equilibrium between those two realities that allowed us to do a lot of things in just 5 years. We did quite a lot of infrastructure and housing and urban transformation with quite a lot of support from the people living in the barrio. That support first came by some early adopters, and now I could say that it's massive all out the neighborhood.
So you do see people motivated, right? You do see them participating and being engaged during this process of urban change.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I like to sort of evaluate these things by taking some perspective. If I take a look at what was the first sort of meeting of participation that we did in 2015, and what is the last process of participation, being the first one related to the infrastructure works that we were doing all along the Barrio Mujica, which were sewage, drainage, streets, public lighting. I mean, how the people of the barrio, how the neighborhoods of the barrio were standing in that 2015, and the level of involvement and the sort of excitement that people in the barrio had with the last thing that we were participating, which is what are we going to do as a city government in all of the new public space which is located under the highway. The difference between those two instances is so immense, because in the first scenario, people from the barrio were mainly, they had no credit in what we were saying. I mean, they were sort of listening to a tale's tale, to a story. I mean, they didn't believe that what we were saying was going to be a reality. And today, the participation focuses on, hey, we know that things are going to happen, so we need to get involved in order to make those things sort of more adapted to what we need. I mean, that difference, that level of involvement and that level of enthusiasm is completely different, and we are very proud of that.
I also want to ask you, Diego, what was the trigger of this project back in 2015? I mean, we know this settlement emerged in the 1930s, but when did it really become a matter of the government?
Well, we in Argentina have an informality. I mean, in Buenos Aires City, in the Buenos Aires City, we have an informality ratio of almost 8%. In Argentina, we have an informality ratio of, let's say, 10%, which, if we compare ourselves to the rest of Latin America, we are in a sort of in very low ratios. I mean, compared with our neighbors in Brazil, in Peru, etc. Barrio 31, Barrio Mujica, has the sort of the flag of being the most iconic barrio in the whole of Argentina. And the message that Horacio Rodriguez Larreta was trying to propose to society is, we need, as a society, to tackle informality, not only in Barrio 31, but in the whole city of Buenos Aires and in the country. I mean, we need to be able of providing to each and every one of our citizens the benefits of forming part of the society, of the formal society. And Barrio 31 was one of the oldest barrios in Argentina and perhaps the most well-known barrio. So transforming Barrio 31 was a great pilot project and was a great example to each and every one of the citizens of the informal barrios in the city of Buenos Aires and the country that things could be transformed.
Knowing the challenges of urban planning and knowing that neighborhoods are rarely free from gentrification, I also want to ask about Barrio 31. I don't believe there is an exception there, but have you considered any policy to mitigate gentrification in Barrio 31?
Well, yeah, I mean, gentrification is perhaps the biggest menace that we faced in Barrio Mujica, because it's located in one of the most expensive parts of the city. So definitely gentrification was perhaps the most critical factor that we were evaluating when we decided to start transforming the barrio. Obviously, the approach towards gentrification is an holistic approach and it's really complex. But just to give the highlights of the main measures that we took, I would divide them in sort of two main approaches. The first one being a strictly urban planning approach, which is what we decided is we need to preserve the texture, the logic of the Barrio 31. So just to give you a very quick example, what we decided is we need to get rid of the biggest pressure that lands suffer on price. The biggest price pressure that lands suffer, which is if you allow big plots and big construction hates possibilities, that definitely is a big pressure on price. So what we decided is, just to give an example, the smallest parcel, the smallest square in the city of Buenos Aires is 300 square meters. The biggest square in the Barrio Mujica is 250. This is a huge decision. I mean, the biggest square to build a new house in Barrio 31 is smaller than the smallest square in the Buenos Aires city. So by taking this specific measure, you avoid people buying several lots and transforming them into one big lot in order to build a big building, for example. The second measure was to make a really strict limit on how high the buildings can go. The highest building in Barrio 31 is only a 4-story building. So you have small plots and not so high buildings. That definitely will put down the pressure on prices. That is the first measure. The second measure is a tax model that we planned, which is, if you are a neighborhood of the Barrio and you want to sell your house to another neighborhood of the Barrio, the state has no intervention in that transaction whatsoever. You just need to declare that, okay, I am a neighborhood of Barrio 31 and I'm selling my house to other neighbor. And that's okay with us. Now, if you as a neighbor are selling your house to someone who is not part of the original census that we did in Barrio 31, then the new buyer needs to pay the state's 3x the original value of the house. And that is a tax that, of course, will take pressure out of the price that the actual inhabitants of Barrio 31 may receive. So those are the main two measures. I mean, there are several others, but I would say that those are the two main political decisions that we took regarding on how to avoid gentrification. And the last being that we have a first refusal right in this transaction that we're just describing. And for example, a neighborhood of the Barrio sells its house to a non-resident of Barrio 31, the state has a first refusal right that allows the state to buy the property first in order to avoid the gentrification going on.
This sounds like a great achievement, Diego, apart from the huge learnings of such a process. And although we understand the complex challenges that such a project could have, it is also clear that it is considered a successful plan. And I want to discuss, therefore, the replicability of such a successful plan in other neighborhoods in Buenos Aires, or even in other cities in the world.
Well, to be honest, I think that we need to look at two things, right? The first one being, I think that COVID-19 will change a lot of realities, not only in this strange last year that we all lived. I mean, social distances, no trips and blah, blah, blah. But COVID-19 presents things that we have not yet understood how will they change. I mean, in the last 30 years, the whole world population started to get more and more urban. And to be honest, I mean, I would like to share with you guys the doubt. I mean, this trend will continue. I'm not so sure. I mean, maybe it does, but I think that we need to take a quick look at that. A quick look, that's impossible. I mean, we need to take a look at that. I would at least present a doubt regarding if the trend of urbanization in the world, the population becoming more urban, will continue in the same manner that it did in the last 30 years. For me, there is a question mark that we need to place after that statement. The second thing being, I mean, regardless of this trend continuing or not, we need to understand that we have something like 1 billion human beings living in informality. The cost of formalizing that billion human beings is astronomical. And there's no money today from multilateral organisms or credit or budgets from the state that is able of tackling that huge demand. We need that we need to come up with models that allow to integrate the society, the private sector, and the government to produce models that can change without investing tons of money, because that is not feasible. I mean, we would take hundreds of years to do that. So I think that the challenge is taking some of the learnings that we made in Barrio 31. We had a great house improvement programs. I think that we had a very nice tackle on economic development. I think that we did have a very nice tackle on the human planning, and taking the learnings of things that were not so good. I mean, for example, house improvement took us a lot of work to put it in place. But I think that the great challenge that we have not yet managed to resolve, but I think that's a great challenge in the future, is how do we get the private sector involved? I mean, how do we transform this gentrification menace that you mentioned into potentially something that help us integrate neighborhoods in a proper manner?
Thank you, Diego. I think this might be a perfect way to close, highlighting the challenges for applicability of such a successful but at the same time difficult and complex project. Thank you for sharing all the insights of this process with us, and thank you for working on such an important project that could become a reference for other cities in the world.
Well, Enrique, thank you very much for the opportunity of chatting with you. And thank you very much to everyone who is watching us for spending the time and investing the time with us. Thank you so much.
We live in the time of cities, as evidenced by almost 60% of global inhabitants that choose to live in them. And as long as the contrary is not proven, they remain the paradigm of life in society. And so it is that during the last decades, citizens have adapted to its transformations, no matter how unpleasant the results. We love the city so much that our sacrifice is there. Surrender to environmental pollution, high rents, population hyperdensity, long distances to travel day by day, or the poor work-life balance, among others. Living just enough for the city, as Stevie Wonder's song cries. Now that there is a real alternative to the suburbs, a facelift won't be enough. A humankind-centered design is no longer a desirable but a reachable parameter. Cities' energy efficiency and sustainability indexes can be greatly improved with a firm commitment to green, big data-driven, and AI technology running in service. It is not a question of dismantling what stands, but of rethinking its uses. Like, for instance, let's say, huge office buildings in Zoom's time. It is time to reshape the city model to make it more attractive and comfortable. City is a multifactorial issue, but a partial answer may lie in size. Is a population of 10 million truly governable in a territory of a few square kilometers? Or is it preferable to split it up in more manageable administrations? And according to the size, the accumulation of both human and financial capital, and of course their additional cultural, creative, and innovation knowledge, is concentrated, feedbacking only a few while taking long to reach all. This wealth gap has produced massive migrations to the cities. That is why a performance based on promoting the distribution of goods and services between these three areas, rural, urban, and periphery, could stop the movement of people and balance the influence of the city, bringing a social and healthy dialogue between equals that redounds to mutual benefits. I know, it's easy to say and hard to do. Territorial occupation was already a problem before the pandemic, but now it is an urgent challenge. That is all from Tomorrow City podcast. We will get back soon with new episodes on the biggest challenges that cities from around the world face. Goodbye to everyone and stay tuned for our next episodes.